this was an extremely helpful introduction. And I think one of the features of our little gathering this afternoon is that if we get everything right, especially on the supervisory front, then the sort of legislation we're discussing this afternoon will never be put into operation in our lifetimes, even the lifetimes of the youngest of us. And that's, I don't know whether that's a comforting thought, but I think it's an important thing to bear in mind. The Commission proposal, I think, is an excellent reflection of where we stand in our discussions at the international level on recovery and resolution of CCPs. That doesn't mean that necessarily both on the supervisory front and on the front of recovery and resolution we have truly succeeded as yet to create as robust a global framework that perhaps we will need in the future, but these are very important steps in the right direction. Now, I want to focus in my remarks on three general areas. The one general area is really the general question of ex-ante incentives for the different actors involved. And the actors were already mentioned. They're the CCPs themselves, they're the CMs, they're the clients. The clients are sometimes a little bit forgotten. I think also in the Commission's proposal, it's one area where perhaps one could give clients a second thought in some areas. But these three immediate participants, but then of course the taxpayers, as represented by the supervisory and resolution authorities. And perhaps to take one example, in the current Commission proposal, there's a large degree of discretion. For example, there's quite a bit of discretion on the precise design for recovery plans. These can be highly individualized. If we talk about some of the major CCPs, I'm not sure how much individual planning is actually a good thing. Because of course, since we talk also about global competition, any sort of tailor-made solutions also offer scope for regulatory competition. And that would also be part of ex-ante incentives that are being created by such measures. But I think more broadly, we need to be very careful in properly aligning responsibilities, in making certain that taxpayers, even in such Armageddon scenarios where we'd be talking about several, in default scenarios, several large CMs being in trouble or even going down, several CCPs, major CCPs globally at the same time going down, there being enormous coordination problems also between jurisdictions. One of the shortcomings, of course, of the Commission proposal is that we don't move to we construct the proposal in parallel to the EBRD, but we do not move to European decision-making powers as we did with banking union. So theoretically, you could end up in a situation where national taxpayers in one member state would be asked to stabilize a global problem, not even only a European problem, but a global problem. And the question is, how could one possibly come to either in a recovery or problem, more likely in a resolution scenario over the course of a weekend to any sort of reasonable agreement on where to go. And so on that level, that would be probably a second recommendation that I would have, being fully conscious that it's not entirely possible to address this problem within the present legislation alone. This would at least also involve the email review, which is upcoming, to try and see to what extent can we move things more to a European level, which I think would be quite reasonable. And then a third point I would like to make to keep the introductory remarks short, it has to do with Brexit and the question, what does Brexit mean for the whole space of supervision and recovery and resolution of CCPs? And I think what's helpful is to think about the challenges that are being posed by Brexit in a sort of three-option approach. One would be to create a more robust third country equivalence regime. And at the moment, we're not being very systematic about what it should really look like. The second, and it's interesting that especially in the space of CCPs, coming from the yes, we already have that, we could have extraterritorial elements in the approach. I mean, there, of course, the possibility of having on-site inspections outside one's own jurisdiction. I think that may be needed if the matters at stake are sufficiently important. And then the third option, which is a very bad default option, given we're talking about globalized institutions, would of course be repatriation, which is probably best avoided. But nevertheless, for the sake of completeness, I think it should be stated that this is also in principle on the cards. And so that's a third discussion that I think we're going to need to have, is to see how we're going to deal with supervision and recovery and resolution of CCPs in the context of Brexit within these three options. And I would very much hope that the second and the first option would be made more explicit in the legislative process coming forward. So these are the three main remarks I wanted to make. Much looking forward to the other introductory statements and then the panel discussion. Thank you very much.